Guys, what's going on? My name's Dr. Frank. I'm the founder of AddictionMindset recovery coaching programs, which are dedicated to helping people quit addictions that I once struggled with to nicotine, THC, energy drinks, and adult media content. In today's video, I want to talk about rediscovering happiness after you quit smoking weed, and I'm going to be referencing a series of methods that we developed within our programs called Happiness Diversification Investing. And you're going to want to grab a pen and paper for today's video because it's going to be somewhat interactive. And I guarantee you're going to want to write some of these things down. When I first quit smoking weed, I had one major problem. And that problem was a lot of my day-to-day happiness was fully invested into weed, into the plant. So naturally, when I quit, I was facing some level of depression. I was facing some pretty extreme moments of sadness. And when I paused and I thought about it as I was getting into my quitting journey, I realized a few different things. The first thing that I realized was I wasn't particularly happy prior to smoking weed, which probably played a bit of a role as to why I decided to get into weed as heavily as I did. So I wasn't really happy prior to smoking. I was happy, but not that happy. Then I realized another thing. I wasn't necessarily happy when I was smoking weed either. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that I was truly suffering from the consequences of a drug addiction, right? My relationships had become damaged. My finances had become damaged. My physical health and mental health had rapidly deteriorated the deeper and deeper I was getting into addiction. And for a lot of people who are looking to quit smoking weed, I think this is a key moment or a crucial realization that you have to have. And that might be that the consequences of smoking weed, the consequences resulting from addiction, might be feeding into the depression. And how do we try and ease that depression? Well, we smoke more weed. That's a problem if weed is ultimately one of the causes of the challenging situations that we're facing. So realizing that was eye-opening for me when it came to quitting. Now, fast forward, here I am, I quit smoking weed, and now I'm dealing with the sadness, the depression that comes afterwards, right? I'm experiencing anhedonia, my dopamine levels are kind of low, my serotonin levels are kind of low, and I realized I had to rebuild my happiness. And there was something that I understood, and it was a mistake that I had made going into smoking weed. And that was investing all of my happiness into a plant. Because when that plant stopped working for me, it was super, super depressing because the thing that was at one point making me somewhat happy was now harming me, was now hurting me. So what do I do now? Now that that's the situation, where do I go from here? And this is where I developed the happiness diversification investing methods or techniques. So I sat down with a pen and paper, which hopefully you're doing right now, and I came up with about 10 different categories of my life that I felt could give me some source of happiness if I invested my time, energy, and focus into each of those categories. And my goal of this technique was to avoid making the mistake of investing all of my emotions, all of my happiness into one single thing. Because throughout my recovery process, I've become well aware that some of these things might get shook or shaken along the way. And I don't want to have all my eggs in one basket. Kind of like the stock market. They tell you to diversify your investments in case one of the stocks tanks. That way you're still protecting yourself. So I discovered about 10 different categories that I wanted to focus on. And category number one was health. Health is super important. And I think without health, it's very, very challenging to be happy. And I'm not saying you have to be 100% healthy. Listen, I have genetic issues that I struggle with day to day, cardiovascular issues, various autoimmune things, stuff like that. But ultimately, if you're not healthy, it's very, very hard to be happy. And when I was smoking weed, I was starting to develop symptoms of cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. So my health was actually further deteriorating. And when you don't feel good, it's hard to partake in activities that would further you feeling better. So when they say health is wealth, that's really not that far-fetched of an idea. So I said, okay, I want to start investing in my health because the healthier I am, the happier I am for the most part, which led me to my next area that I was going to invest in, which was exercise. When I exercised, going for a walk, going for a swim, lifting weights, doing cardio, doing yoga, it made me feel better. It made me feel healthier. So by investing some of my time and some of my focus into developing and learning about exercise, I started to feel better, and that started to lead to some happiness. Now, the next thing that I realized, part number 3 or area number 3 that I invest in for happiness is my nutrition and eating healthy. This was a really big one. When I wouldn't eat healthy, I wouldn't have the energy to exercise. And when you're not eating healthy and when you're not exercising, you're not going to feel very good. That's a really basic thing that I learned. Movement is super important. And in order for me to have the energy to move how I want to move, to not be stagnant in my day-to-day life and my day-to-day activities, I had to start eating healthier. And I learned some basic things about food. I learned that fruit gives you a blood sugar spike, which is great when you're quitting an addiction. I learned that eggs and nuts and seeds are great sources of dopamine producing omega fatty acids. So I really started to focus on eating healthier foods, which gave me the energy to exercise. And when I was doing those two things, my health physically was starting to feel a lot better. The next thing that I realized, tip number 4, point number 4 in my life that I realized made me happy was when I'm helping others. I have a chiropractic business. I have an addiction recovery coaching business. I'm a man of many talents. And it turns out that I'm really passionate about helping other people. And when I'm helping more people, that's fueling and feeding my internal source of happiness. So I had to take that a step further though, because helping other people while feeling healthy wasn't exactly enough. So what I did was I took my passion of helping other people and I started to turn that into a business. I started to turn that into, more importantly, an income-driven business. Now, why is that important? Because when you create a career for yourself that you like, it can truly become a source of happiness. And although I was doing things that I liked, chiropractic care, even addiction recovery coaching early on, I wasn't necessarily happy even though I was helping people because I felt kind of trapped and stuck within my business, which is a common problem that a lot of entrepreneurs eventually run into throughout the course of their early career. So when it came to business, I realized something. I had to generate enough income to give me freedom from my business. So when I wanted to step away at points throughout my day-to-day routines, I could. And that's exactly what I started to do. How am I going to develop a business? How am I going to maintain something that I'm passionate about that can provide me with income when I'm not 100% focused on that business? When I'm enjoying time with my wife, when I'm enjoying time in the gym, when I'm enjoying time on a vacation. And that's exactly what I started to work towards. And I think this is super important. I think career is a really, really big deal. Most people are going to spend between 40 and 70 hours a week focused on their career. And I think it's very, very hard to be healthy and happy if you're working in a career that you don't like. Now, on the flip side, you may not have a career at this point. You may be facing unemployment or other challenges like that. For me, working gives me a sense of confidence, it gives me a sense of fulfillment, and it gives me a sense of pride. That might not apply to you, and that's okay. But in order for me to be happy, I realized that I had to be working smart to my full potential in an income-driven business that also allotted me a sense of freedom from that work. So now we have a business that's focused on helping others, driving income, which gives me time to go eat healthy, exercise, and boom, feel better about myself. So tip number 6, or area number 6 in my life that I invest into for happiness, is my relationships. This is relationships with my family, relationships with my wife, and then community-based relationships that I have, okay? So there's many sources of relationships that we can look into. When I first quit smoking weed, my relationships with my family were a mess. They had just gone through a horrible divorce, my parents. Me, my sisters, we were kind of scattered, right? Because we were all trying to piece ourselves back together. When I looked at my relationships as far as intimate relationships goes, that was non-existent. I was chasing cheap dopamine sources, right? Next Tinder date, next Bumble date, next whatever. No serious relationship was on my radar. And quite frankly, I didn't have the organization to even maintain one at that point in my life if I had pursued it. And I certainly wasn't part of any community or any group or any cohort that had similar goals or similar ambitions to what I wanted to achieve going forward in my kind of sobriety and recovery process. So I slowly started to work on each of these relationships in hopes of a return on my happiness. I went to therapy to help me with the family relationships. I reframed my dating and my goals of dating. I decided that the fast, cheap dating wasn't working for me, and I wanted to seek something more meaningful that hopefully would result in a marriage, which it has so far. And I want to have kids. Hopefully that will be the next step. And I wanted to then find community groups that had similar interests to me. So I started to invest my money that I was making from my business into business-oriented communities, people who thrived on making YouTube videos, people who thrived on running healthcare practices. And I started to join different mastermind groups and online and in-person communities to help me do better in my business and push me further towards my goals. So now here I am, reconstructing my relationships, making real human connection. And a big part of that, actually, guys, when it comes to relationships, on a side note, was staying away from adult media content. That was super damaging to my happiness. And I learned some other stuff too. When I would drink, I'd crave adult media content. So I eventually had to really cut down, and now I don't really drink at all. I had to cut down on that too. But here we are, combining all these different things. Area number 7 in my life that I decided to invest into to reclaim some happiness was in my sleep patterns. I noticed that if I would push it too hard and wouldn't get a good night's sleep or wouldn't focus on sleep, I would feel miserable. I would feel anxious and depressed. And coincidentally, the less I exercised, the crappier foods I ate, the more I drank alcohol, and the more I isolated myself on a day-to-day basis, the worse my sleep quality would be. So by doing all of those things leading up to now where we are getting a good night's sleep became easy. And the more rested I am, the more energized I feel, and the more healthy and happy I feel overall. Area number 8 that I decided to invest my time into was focusing on getting my tasks done. It's a really burdening feeling when you're procrastinating. And the more I would procrastinate day to day, the less happy I would feel. I would put off important events. I would put off important work things. I even procrastinated in my relationships, right? Addressing things that needed to be addressed. And the more I procrastinated, the more anxiety I got. The more anxiety I got, the more depressed I became, and the less happiness I had. So I started to invest my time and focus onto getting things done. And I did a lot of this actually through journaling and kind of like morning meditation routines, maybe not in the traditional sense, but I always talk about it on this channel, the high performance planner. This is something that I use every single day, and it helps me organize the tasks that I need to get done. Because when I sit down at night to read, which is something that I'm going to talk about in a little bit, and I see that I've accomplished X, Y, and Z, I feel a sense of satisfaction, and that satisfaction then results in feelings of happiness, achievement, confidence building, all of those things. Area number 9, this one was a big one for me, and it's taken me several years to realize. I like going outside. I like sunshine and I like warm weather. So I live in Buffalo, New York. So it snows here, it's gray, it's cloudy, it's rainy. I prioritized creating a business and an income that would allow me to travel when necessary, when I start to get those winter blues or seasonal depression. So traveling and getting myself exposed to outdoors is a huge source of happiness to me. And that's become a huge priority of mine that I'm focusing on going forward into my future. Now it's summertime, so I have the opportunity to get outside, but I promise you, I am preparing intensely for the upcoming winter so I can find ways to travel and still enjoy myself while successfully working, while still having the freedom to step away from these businesses. Tip number 10, this one's great. It's reading. Reading makes me happy because when I read, I'm usually focused on reading topics involved in personal development, nutrition, exercise, addiction recovery. These are all areas of education and growth. When I'm reading, I'm learning. When I'm learning, I'm growing. And when I'm growing, I'm applying what it is I'm learning to all these other aspects that I just talked about. And when you combine each of these things, when you take each of these activities and look at them as a whole, these are the areas of my life that I decided to invest my happiness, my time into. And again, I call this happiness diversification investing. All of my happiness doesn't just rely on my wife. All of my happiness doesn't just rely on my business. All of my happiness doesn't just rely on my ability to exercise. I've invested my time and my efforts into multiple different categories. So when one of those ships gets rocked, I know that I have other areas to turn to where I can still receive happiness from them. And when I look at the last 5 years of my sobriety, 5.5 years plus now, I realize that it's this comprehensive plan that has allowed me to succeed thus far in my recovery process, because I know one thing. I want to do my best to not go back to being an unhappy person, because I think it was that intense unhappiness that led me into the cycle of weed addiction that I eventually experienced. Now, what I would like you to do, and hopefully you've been writing down some things as we've been going through this, is come up with your own sources of happiness. What are areas of your life that you could invest into now that you're no longer investing into weed that could give you a return on your time and your efforts, and that return be a source of happiness? I would love for you guys to write those things in the comments below so other viewers of our channel can read that and enjoy that. Now, last thing, this didn't happen overnight. This list didn't happen overnight. You have to pick one thing. For me, it started with my health. My health was in a horrible place when I quit smoking weed. And I knew I couldn't accomplish any of this other stuff if I didn't get my health in order. So that's where I began. For you, it might be your faith. It might be your business. It might be your relationship. Pick one thing. Start to invest into that. And once you got a little bit of an investment in it and you're feeling good, start branching out and investing into other things. This is 5.5 years in the making of what was a 9-year addiction to nicotine, THC, energy drinks, and adult media content. Now, if you're watching this and you're not sure, you're having trouble coming up with a list, consider booking a one-on-one addiction recovery coaching appointment with myself or joining our Addiction Mindset Accountability Group. In either of those programs, you're going to learn a lot more about happiness diversification investing when you quit smoking weed. Follow me into the next video where I talk a little bit about bad days, when I have a bad day, an unhappy day, and how I handled that throughout my recovery process. I'll see you guys either in the pinned comment or in the next video.